Welcome to another edition of Regina District Industry Education Council. Today I have a very special guest, Dr. Aaron Genest. Thanks for being here, Aaron.
Hi, Jack. Thank you, Jack. It's a pleasure.
So, tell me about yourself. It doesn't sound like you have one role. When someone asks you, what do you do? How do you answer that?
So I fail at a lot of things. It turns out that the faster you fail, the more you get to do. So my first failure is that I'm a failed musician. I spent 10 years on the road in an a cappella group called Streetniks, touring across Canada and the United States in smelly vans and smellier hotel rooms with a small group of people. And we sang a lot of music in elementary schools, high schools, universities, theaters, and barely earned a living. But it taught me a lot about running a small business and trying to keep yourself afloat, a lot about marketing, and in particular digital marketing, because it was happening just as people were starting to understand what effect the internet was going to have on music. So Napster was just coming out and people were beginning to use the internet to advertise themselves. This is pre-Facebook, pre-Bandcamp, pre-Spotify. So, and we were on the cusp of a lot of that. I think we were one of the first bands to upload a sample library to the web. It would have taken you about 5 or 6 days to download it. It was, I think, about a gig worth of data. But yeah, we learned a lot.
You were trailblazers back then.
It was unique and it was award-winning, but it just didn't make a lot of money. So kids, don't become a musician. You can't make any money. After that, I had met a woman I wanted to marry, and I knew that 10 months on the road did not a marriage make. So I settled down and went back to university. I'd taken a couple of years of university in music and dropped out. So I went back this time as a major in computer science because my marks weren't good enough to get me into commerce. And that turned out to be a good thing.
Wait. You went into computer science because your marks weren't good enough to get into business?
Yeah, the times.
To me, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, it was arts and science. So the Department of Computer Science is in the College of Arts and Science at the University of Saskatchewan. So the entrance requirements are at the lowest of any of the colleges. And so I hadn't done very well in my last couple of years of university. I'd been running a business on the side and focused elsewhere. And so there was no way I was going to get into a college with serious entrance requirements. And so my dream of getting a commerce degree and then an MBA and going into business was shattered. But that was fine because actually in my very first year with computer science, I realized that I had very much enjoyed working with computers in the past. I'd taught myself HTML and done a lot of our digital work with the band. So it was just the next step into that. And I picked up a summer job out of my second year with a small tech company called Modern Digital Communications. It doesn't exist anymore. And I was responsible for implementing voice over IP, one of the very first voice over IP servers.
No way.
Based on the Asterix PBS system. And I actually implemented a prototype, or I implemented a production version of a prototype that had been written by an old friend of mine from elementary school named Jeff Dick. And Jeff and I had a long history. We actually, when I moved to Saskatoon, when I was 6, I moved into the house that he had been born into when he was a kid. We went to the same elementary school together, and now here we were years after, a decade of not being in touch. I was implementing his prototype, and I had a great time. I learned that I loved computers, I loved programming, I loved the business of it. And that took me on. Jeff then introduced me to his PhD supervisor at the time, Carl Goodwin, who runs the Interaction Lab at the University of Saskatchewan. And so when I had a chance to do an internship, I did it under him as a research assistant, and that propelled me into a master's, which I flipped to a PhD in his lab. And before I knew it, I had a PhD and was looking for a job. And it was then that Jeff re-enters my life, because I saw him visit my LinkedIn profile, and I messaged him and said, "Oh, are you looking for people to come work at your company," which was a small company called Solido. And he said, "Well, yeah, why don't you come down and interview?" And so I interviewed with him and my current boss, Chris Breen, and got hired. And that was, I don't know, 9 years ago, I guess.
So you were at Solido 9 years ago?
Yeah.
Because they've come up a lot. Like, I've heard a lot of Solido, like, it's like one of those classic Saskatchewan companies.
Well, so let me back up a little bit. So if you're not familiar with how small businesses in the tech sector work, this is a great example of it. There were a trio of people from Saskatoon that came out of the engineering college with an idea, and their capstone project was something that they thought maybe they could commercialize. And so when they got out, they formed a small company, not called Solido, and they brought it up and they did pretty well, and then that company got sold. And they all had a little bit of money. And so a year to the day after it was sold and they'd exited, they founded another company called Solido. And they started hiring a few people. So they hired, amongst others, Chris Breen. And then many years later, they hired Jeff and then me. And what they were doing was building software designed to help people who are designing computer chips. When you design a computer chip, you need to simulate it to know that it's going to actually work. And so much the same way as a flight simulator works, and you make sure that the plane is going to fly and that the person who's flying it knows how to do it and it's not going to crash into the ground. A computer chip simulator simulates how the chip is going to operate under a lot of circumstances, no matter how it was built, because there's variance in the way it's built, no matter how it's operating, whether it's minus 40 or it's inside an engine of a car at 225 degrees, it's got to operate. And so it simulates all of these conditions. It turns out that that's really complicated and takes a long time. And so Solido's magic sauce was figuring out how to do that very, very, very quickly. And as a result, Solido software is now used in the creation of every modern piece of electronics in the world. It has to run through one version or another of our software at some point before it gets out the door. And so if you have a phone in your pocket that was built in the last 6 or 7 years, if you have an NVIDIA graphics card in your laptop or PC that was built in the last 12 years, if you have a car that was built in the last 4 or 5 years, guarantee you 100% that all of the chips in that were built using our software.
There's a very good reason why I've heard that name before. Jesus Christ, that's incredible.
It's a bit of a secret in that it was a small company in Saskatoon. At least it was until 3 years ago. And 3 years ago, it got acquired. We'd grown from, it was 14 people when I joined the company to about 60. And we got acquired by one of the largest companies in the world, a company called Siemens, maybe better known for building trains and MRIs in the medical field and windmills. There's a Siemens Energy Group. They also build factories.
It's German-based, correct?
It is. It's out of Munich. That's right. It turns out that when you want to build factories or big things, you also want to simulate what that looks like. And there's a term of art called the digital twin, which means that anything that you build in real world, you should have a digital version of it first, that you can manipulate in a million ways to know whether or not it's going to work or when it's going to break or anything else. And so Siemens, about 15 years ago, started investing really heavily in software to create digital twins of everything that they built. And since they build factories for cars, and cars have computer chips in them, they needed to be able to have a digital twin of computer chips. So they bought a company called Mentor, which is a US company. And that company in turn said, hey, by the way, that Solido company, they're beating us in every way. You should just go and buy them instead. And so that's exactly what they did. And so the 60 or so of us got bought out. and we became part of Siemens 3 years ago. So that's my career arc, is kind of going from failed musician through graduate school, and I guess failed academic because I didn't then go on and get a job in the university environment, and then
like some of us look up to you because of that.
and then into a startup that then got bought out. So maybe maybe early, you could argue we could have stuck it out and made more money. So maybe failed from the perspective of a startup. Into Siemens, and so now I am one very small cog in a company of 350,000 people.
Wow! But one of the largest 100 companies in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, it is. Yeah, I think in the top 40 right now, and it is the largest software company in the world.
One quick question: what's your working style like? What's your day to day?
My day-to-day varies a lot. So the thing I try to tell the people who work with me is that if they're doing the same thing after 6 months, they're probably doing the wrong thing. We move very, very rapidly, and because our business is scaling, we generate about 50% more revenue every year right now. And when you're already large, that's extremely difficult to do. In fact, there's a term used in the business called hypergrowth, and that's actually what we're in right now, is hypergrowth. And so, hypergrowth is pretty easy if your revenue is $50,000 a year, or if your revenue's, in the six figures range. But when we're in, the tens of millions, hypergrowth is very hard to achieve. If you're going to maintain hypergrowth, one of the things you have to do is constantly be innovating operationally to be able to do more with less and to add more to what you're doing. And so, whereas 5 years ago I was emailing individual customers, a year later I was talking to groups full of people, rooms full of people, about how they did their work, about how they designed computer chips, and kind of doing speaking tours through the ecosystem of semiconductor design. And then a year later I found myself embroiled in trying to hire people really, really rapidly and figure out how we were going to grow that way. And somewhere in there, I figured out we changed our operations so our technical people weren't doing non-technical tasks at all. A lot of my day-to-day now involves communication. A lot of it involves organizational meetings, trying to stitch together different parts of the organization to work in harmony, try to figure out what's the most efficient way. But I also work directly with customers. Usually when there's a fire, usually when somebody's really upset with us for some reason, that's when I come in and have to fall on my sword. I keep a couple handy just in case. And then my job is to figure out why people are upset, because often it's not the reason they're saying that they're upset. And then to reassure them that we're going to fix it, and then to fix it. And so since those problems are all different, my job looks very different from day to day.
I can imagine. I'm thinking of, if I'm in grade 12, thinking computer science, isn't it just sitting behind a computer screen all day and plugging in ones and zeros? What do you say to what is computer like? To me, computer science is hacking. What would you say to that student that has a preconceived notion?
Yeah, I mean, everything you've ever learned about what computer scientists do is both right and wrong at the same time. There are absolutely people with computer science degrees who hack away, whether it's in InfoSec, literally hacking, or it's being in R&D, doing research and development, building a piece of software, working with a team on that, whether it be a game or an enterprise piece of software like this, or a commercial piece of software like Zoom that we're using right now. All of these were written by people who have to use computers to write code. There's another aspect, which is that computer science, and I think it's a Chomsky quote, computer science has about as much to do with computers as astronomy does with telescopes. The computers are an instrument that enable us to do other things and study other things, and primarily problem solving. And it turns out that there are a couple of particular skills that are taught in computer science that aren't taught very well elsewhere. Engineering is close, but in computer science, you're taught abstraction. And abstraction is an idea that a problem that you can apply at one level or one domain can be understood more generally to have a solution that is similar at a different level or a different domain. And that's a little bit difficult to understand unless you go and you look at, say, something like Uber. And you say, okay, the problem that Uber was built to resolve was the availability, the crowdsourcing of rides, essentially. And then you say, oh, okay, well, if we can do that for cars, can we do that for hotel rooms? And then before you know it, you've done that. And you have another unicorn business. Oh, well, if we can do that for hotel rooms, can we do that for something else? And, some of those ideas fail and some of them succeed, but at its heart is the idea that you can abstract a general problem, which is there's a regulated availability that causes friction for a user. We can get around that by allowing casual people to be involved in the market. Let's figure out what other markets look like that, and let's build a business around that. And so you find computer scientists all over the place, and not just in pure software companies like in the era of Bill Gates, but you find them now running businesses that look like they have nothing to do with software. One of the businesses that is based in Saskatchewan here is building furniture on a subscription basis, and that's Pivot. And these are the founders from Skip the Dishes. They figured out with Skip the Dishes a problem, which was that the food delivery process needed to be crowdsourced to some extent. And they solved it, and they made a fair amount of money. So now they're investing it in furniture. However, they're applying, the same kind of problem solving skills to furniture as they did to food delivery. And I'll leave it, they're still pretty secretive organizations, so I'll leave it to you to uncover more about exactly how their business works. So that's like the two ways, right? Like the people who actually touch computers and work with them nonstop, and then the people who are understanding the problem solving skills that are taught by computer science. But there's a third branch, which is that technology is in absolutely everything. And when we look at jobs across Saskatchewan or indeed around the world, we talk about tech jobs, but we also talk about tech adjacent jobs. And tech adjacent jobs are jobs that are enabled by technology that would not exist without technology, that have to interact with technology, but are not purely programming or development jobs. And in the past, during the Industrial Revolution, what that meant was there were kind of, the people who built the machines and then the people who used the machines. And everybody uses the machines. And we don't think of a farmer as a machine user, but nonetheless, that's exactly what they're doing. And we don't think about, the only term that we still have that echoes back to that is machinist, somebody who makes parts, right, out of metal. But really, everybody is very much a machinist in the sense that they interact with machines. We drive cars, we drive vehicles, but we also, take elevators and escalators, and we use cash registers. Well, not anymore. We moved on to technology, which actually brings me to my point, which is that most modern jobs, increasingly modern jobs, are not purely the manipulation of machines, but they're the interaction with digital technology. And it turns out that the more valuable the job, I'm stating this inversely for a moment here, I'll flip it around, but the more valuable the job, the more sophisticated your knowledge about how computers work and how to interact with them has to be. And actually, the reason it's valuable is because not very many people know how to do that. And so it turns out that you find computer scientists absolutely everywhere. You find them in mining, in oil and gas, in forestry, you find them in medicine, you find them in banks, you find them on farmers' fields. I had a farmer complaining the other day to me that they were unable to finish their harvest on time because one of the things they had to do was fly out some of the computer technicians from Toronto to fix the combine. And so, like, honestly, this is the kind of world that we're increasingly living in. And so a computer science degree is in many ways, or at least some of the applied skills that you learn from the early computer science programming, is necessary for those really high value jobs.
Yeah, it's funny, about 2-3 years now, I came out of the business faculty at U of R, but I will openly tell high school students, if you don't know what to do, go to computer science. Because I don't know how many industries have an increase in job count in the future, but I would be easily willing to bet there's going to be more demand for computer science or software engineers into the future. But you took your doctorate in philosophy.
Well, so
that might be a different tangent, please. Yeah.
No. All PhDs are doctors of philosophy, actually. So it doesn't matter what field you're in, and it's a relic of academia. So it doesn't matter what field you're in, you have a doctor of philosophy, unless you have a doctor of medicine or doctor of veterinary medicine, which are DVMs and MDs, as you know. Yeah. But a PhD is literally a doctor of philosophy, and so a commerce grad with a PhD will be a doctor of philosophy and commerce. A philosophy graduate with a PhD is a doctor of philosophy and philosophy. And so, so don't get sidetracked by the language around.
Like, give me an Aristotle quote here. Come on.
I don't have one.
I kid.
I got nothing.
Cool. You already told me about your education, so maybe let's just talk about the future. Let's dive into Sask Tech a little bit. Where do you think it's going right now? And I know we're coming off a really interesting year. In your world, any predictions? Anything? Is it good to be in Saskatchewan? Is it a bad place to be right now? What are you feeling?
That's a really complicated question.
Let's start with
maybe
an
let me
easier
start
one.
by well no let me start by talking about that there's something called Sask Tech that exists and why that exists. But 4 years ago, the government of Saskatchewan came to a few leaders in the tech field and said that they understood that there was a technology industry that was starting to come together, and becoming a significant part of the provincial economy, but there was nobody who could speak to that. There was nobody from the industry that was interested in talking to government. And that's probably your reaction as well. I mean, who wants to talk to government, right? That sounds really boring. But every industry tends to talk to government because government, at its core, it's built to service people and to service sectors, groups of people or groups of people in companies. And so they get a little bit upset if they don't have anyone to talk to and something's doing fine on its own. And so I came together with a bunch of other people. I was very junior at the table. It was mostly CEOs, some of them CEOs of much larger companies, and we tried to find a problem that we thought government could help with. And in truth, I was in that meeting because nobody from my company actually wanted to do it. So they said, well, we'll send Aaron. And it turned out that the one thing that was really a problem for all of us was labor. We don't have enough people to hire. It takes us too long to hire. And so we founded an organization that speaks to government. It advocates a little bit, but really it advises more than anything else, related to how the government and post-secondary institutions, our universities, the polytechs, the colleges, and even the K-12 system can work together to help ensure that there are enough people in Saskatchewan who can do the tech jobs. That problem has become really complicated over the years, but that was the initial vision. And a few months later, I found myself in a room with the Premier and several ministers talking about the problem. And a few months later, I found myself as president of this emerging organization. Easily the most junior person as I said, at the table, and I still remain that. I'm an applications and engineering manager. I'm not even a director. I used to be a director, but after the acquisition, everybody gets demotion. So now I'm a manager again. And yet I speak. It's my pleasure to speak on behalf of the CEOs and the people who work at the tech companies across Saskatchewan. So let's loop back to your question. Is there a future in tech? Well, if you're a worker, yeah, absolutely. I just told you that out of all of the industries in Saskatchewan, the one that the government is paying the most attention to, working the hardest to try and get people to come and work in, is technology. If you go to government websites, you'll see them advertising to get companies to move here and to get investors to put money in here. And technology is the only place where they say, we want people to come here because we don't have enough people. And so if you are at all technically minded, at all interested in this, this is the field for you. The other thing is you don't actually have to be a technologist to be in a tech field. You can be interested in marketing. You can be interested in advertising. Those are two, or sales. Those are many of the same things. But accounting or finance in some way, absolutely. But also the other fields, like if you're interested in mining or agriculture, if you're interested in other fields of engineering, mechanical, civil, all of those have connections to tech. And if you're able to connect the dots between how tech is influencing that field and find the place where you can be at that intersection, you're an incredibly valuable person. The future across all of those industries, for better or for worse, is increasing automation. And part of that is robotics, but also part of that is AI, and the increasing use of machine learning. Independently of whether we have a singularity and AIs take over the world, the application of sophisticated machine learning techniques to large pools of data is really how we're making decisions now in every single field. Whether it's an agricultural field where we're trying to understand what yield looks like on a meter by meter basis and what the different inputs for fertilizer and seed density and whatever else need to be able to manage that yield dynamically as we're sowing, as we're reaping, as we're fertilizing. Or it's a mining field where we're instead of 100 people underground and 10 people at the mine head, we've got one person. And that's the direction it's going, because the most dangerous place to be at a mine is underground, and the most dangerous place to be in underground is at the mine head. Nobody wants to have employees there. It's dangerous and costly. So they're pulling everybody out, right? So if you can learn how to remote operate machines and how to understand that yield at a mine head matters, and how you can adjust that yield and how you can manage the data that's coming from the myriad of sensors all through the mine to optimize the way that work is happening and the predictive maintenance that needs to be done on all of the machines. It's going to be a technology job. So it doesn't matter what field you're in. You can find that place where the technology is going to intersect. You can learn enough about that technology to be the person that is relied on in that field, and you'll become incredibly valuable. So is there a future here in Saskatchewan? Absolutely.
Did you ever get a point where when you talk about this stuff, I feel like it's so far advanced, or it feels so smart. Do you ever have a moment where you talk to somebody, say a boss or say a client, where you don't feel like you know anymore, and you have this moment of you either feel like an imposter or you shouldn't be there? Has that happened?
Yeah, pretty much every day.
Like, thank God, because you seem incredibly smart, and I'm like, I understand most of this, but I guess I'm trying to talk to the student that maybe isn't that tech savvy, thinking like, what if I don't know this stuff?
Yeah. Getting through that imposter syndrome and getting to the meat of it is really hard. I think we all have it. My wife is a veterinary microbiologist who specializes in Arctic parasitology, and that sounds like a real mouthful. And when you get down to it, a huge amount of her job is just trying to understand what people are saying. And that's and then figuring out how she can help. That kind of goes across everything. And the most powerful thing I learned when I started my job, I started in, I guess I'll finish that sentence. The most powerful thing I learned when I started my job was saying, I don't understand. I started as an applications engineer. I now manage a team of that, but I was a director of customer experience for a while. I started as an application engineer in a field of which I had no knowledge. I'd never done any circuit design. I'd never met anyone who'd done circuit design. I knew nothing about the tools involved. The people who were doing the programming in my company are really smart and way ahead of where I was at that time. And now they're light years ahead because they've kept growing and I haven't. I've forgotten half of what I learned in university about programming. And so I got into meetings with people who had PhDs in electrical engineering and were showing me wave patterns on an electronic version of an oscilloscope and telling me that there was something wrong with the way that our software was interacting. And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And so I learned that I did have knowledge because I was being trained every day. I had bits of knowledge that they didn't have. And they had a whole bunch of knowledge that I didn't have that didn't really matter. It didn't pertain to the situation. And so what we needed to do was find how my bits of knowledge were going to be that missing puzzle piece in their knowledge that was going to let them do better. And so I didn't need to know everything. I just needed to know one thing. And if it was the right thing, it was going to help. And that really has gotten me through. I'm still, not an expert in labor economy. I'm not an expert in how technology is used in agriculture and mining and oil and gas and medicine and fintech or anything else. I'm not an expert in any of those. I can't actually tell you much more than I have already told you. But I learned the key bit of knowledge that helps me communicate from that field to you. And then it sounds really, really smart because it's the right piece of knowledge. But the minute that anybody would to dig deeper, my next thing would be, oh, I don't understand. Please tell me more. Because then I learn the next piece of knowledge. It's not my fault that I don't know it yet. I haven't learned it, right? I haven't been exposed to it. And so that's okay, right? Because we don't need people who know everything. We need people who are willing to learn the next thing.
That's brilliant. I love that quote. Wow. So what's your next step? Where are you, what's the next big leap for my friend, Dr. Genest? And I say that because I'm like, I feel like you're working on all these things. I feel like if I were you, I'd be like, I did it. I'm good. But obviously there's some intrinsic motivation. You run a team. You're working on some really interesting things and you're on like the pulse of the province for technology, which I'm like, that's got to be so fulfilling to see where it is now compared to 10 years ago. Oh.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm not alone here. There's lots of people who are doing lots of really great stuff in the province and know a lot about it. There's Sean O'Connor, who's running the venture capital fund for Connexus out of Regina. There's Jordan McFarlane, who's running the Connexus Cultivator there. There's Carrie Harvey, who's the CEO of Innovation Saskatchewan. There's, you can just go down a list of people who are experts in various aspects of our information economy here in the province and dedicated to making it a better place. Not to mention all of the university deans, provosts, and presidents, and the people in colleges of education, in the ministries of education and in schools, all trying to fit together this incredibly complex puzzle. It's by no means solved, right? This isn't really about a personal journey here. At some point, we're just talking about abstraction, right? You learn how to solve a little problem at work in a scaling organization. You learn how to attract people to come and work for your company, and suddenly you realize, oh, that's not the only problem. In fact, the whole industry needs that. Oh, well, to do that, we need to have universities kind of giving applied courses in computer science, not just pure computer science courses. Oh, well, how are we going to get people to go into those? I guess we need to change our education system from in the K-12 system. Oh, well, what about immigrants? I mean, there's this massive, massive challenge to which we can apply all of the lessons that we learn at smaller scales or in different domains. And there is so far to go to get that going. That's the exciting part. That's the what next is let's do that. In my day job, the one I'm getting paid for, there's also similarly large problems, right? We're a small piece of a large organization coming in through 2 acquisitions. We have a really efficient way of doing things, but we've bitten off more than we can chew in some ways. We're constantly scrabbling for resources. There's all of this big company out there to explore and to meet and to try and figure out how we can work together to be able to do better and bigger things every single day. And so there's, this isn't the pinnacle. I sincerely hope it's not. That'd be awfully disappointing. This is just
During
the
a pandemic.
Yeah, this is just the beginning of stuff, right? This is there's a lot more to come for me and for everybody else who's involved in the industry or living in the province. And so I think the what's next is, well, honestly, the next meeting's on my schedule. But in the larger scale of things, it's let's try to pull together those things some more. Let's help the government achieve its goal of tripling the tech sector in the next 4 years. Let's try to ensure that there are good education pathways for people who want to be able to join our sector. Let's make sure that my group of 12 or 14 employees is happy and healthy and achieving their professional goals. Those are lots of challenges. There's lots of mountains still to climb.
So outside of work, what gets you excited? You have any hobbies?
I have 3 kids. Who needs a hobby?
Like I have a family. What do you think?
Yeah, pretty much. I have a 5-year-old boy, a 13-year-old boy as of tomorrow, and a 14-year-old boy. So I'm extremely busy. But as a household, we're video gamers. We're board gamers. We're RPG gamers. We play tabletop role-playing games. We ski cross country and downhill. Actually, this summer, I'm hoping we try to do special things with our kids when they turn 13. It's kind of this thing. So the thing I'm trying to do with my new 13-year-old is the West Coast Trail, which is a very challenging hike on the west coast of Vancouver Island. It's about 75 kilometers, and it takes 6 to 8 days. To put that into perspective, if you're fully loaded with a big backpack on relatively flat terrain, you can easily do 20 kilometers a day. This is definitely there's one time where it takes 2 days to do 22 kilometers. So it's going to be a heck of a walk. You can look it up.
I've heard
a great video of it.
Yeah, I've had some friends that have done it, and I've only heard good things about it. So good for you.
It'll be fun.
Only a couple questions left.
Sure.
Was there a big adaptation to the pandemic for you guys, or was it pretty much you work remotely already? Talk a little bit maybe about what happened last year.
Sure, I need to answer something and then I will do that.
That's
Just
all right.
Pause for a second, I'm sorry.
No worries.
I'm back. So when the pandemic struck, we sent everybody home. Probably, I think it was, March 22nd or something. Our entire office went home, and there might have been a half-day disruption for us. We're all already enabled to work remotely. We've supported people working from home if they're feeling under the weather, and it's been a real productivity boon for us. From my end of the organization, where we're used to talking to people all the time, applications engineers are usually in the rest of the industry in the field. They spend all day at a customer site, and they don't really have an office that they occupy. But Saskatchewan is really hard to get anywhere from. And so we'd adapted very early on to the idea that we were, going to do some travel, because it's nice to see people face to face and make those connections. But the real work was happening remotely through screen sharing, through WebEx or whatnot. And so that didn't really change anything for us. So really, starting March 23rd, we were at 100%, and that was unique. It took the rest of our organization a long time to get kind of up to full levels of productivity, and some of them argue they're still not there, that they'll never be at full productivity till they're back at a customer site. The interesting side effect of that is that then the rest of the organization started paying attention to what we were doing and has adopted many of the techniques that we had to invent here in Saskatoon, because we can't get a flight out that doesn't take 9 hours to get to the first major airport in the US. And so now most of our industry looks more like they work from Saskatoon than ever before. And that's turned out to be a real boon for our own organization, but it's also nice. It's allowed us to be very flexible.
Very cool. I think you already answered this, but even yourself throughout your career and life, you've always been in Saskatchewan. With your mindset and in your skill set, you could have been in Silicon Valley, New York, Vancouver, Toronto. Why here?
Well, this is a great place to live. Whatever you might think of it right now, especially if you're in high school, the whole world is open to you. I spent 10 years traveling the world. I spent 10 years traveling through the US and Canada. And I've seen almost every city in Canada, and certainly a large chunk of the US cities. And this is amongst the best places to live there.
Cool.
I've since, as a professional, I've now visited a lot of European cities and spent time in Europe. And they're amazing places, and there are lovely things about them, and there are cultural things that I kind of wish we would adopt more. And I'm richer for having been there, but this is very much home. And I think you find the place that you feel you belong, and you invest in that, and you make that better. So moving isn't going to really change my situation. I'm still going to be me. I'm going to bring myself with me. There are still going to be things I dislike wherever I go. And I'm not knocking people moving to be happier. I mean, there are some people just hate being cold, and all their life they would be miserable in a climate like ours. So sure, you're welcome to go. But my wife hates insects, so if we went someplace warmer, she'd be unhappy all the time as well, because there'd be a spider sitting on her face when she woke up in the morning. So you bring your likes and dislikes with you wherever you go, and so it's far better, from my point of view, to invest in the community that you're living in to make it a better one. And I believe pretty strongly that that's worth doing, because it brings you up, but it also brings up everyone around you, and that feels like the right thing to be doing.
That's very cool. Yeah, I want to almost just thank you for Sask Tech and what you've done there, just because I always made the joke when I was graduating university, everyone asked, well, where are you going? You going west or east? And I would say now, granted, I don't talk to a lot of university grads, but you don't hear a lot of people wanting to move right away. It isn't a dismal place for students. I would argue that it's actually a really, really entrepreneurial friendly place to be right now to that younger generation. But that doesn't go without understanding the things that have been going on in the background, which I think you've been a part of, pushing this idea of that Sask Tech and making sure the government is held accountable for that, making it easier for technology companies here.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think you're overscribing the impact that I've individually had to that. It is the collective group of people who have cared about this that have really moved the needle. And you're right. There are really solid arguments to make, and they've been made by better people than I, that this is one of the best places to found a tech company in the world right now. And indeed, we're seeing a renaissance with a huge surge in tech company entrepreneurship, and a massive increase in diversity. So as a female founder here, for instance, in tech, it's better than it's ever been. There's a really solid community that's incredibly supportive. The joy of being in Saskatchewan is you're unlikely to actually be competing with anybody. The tech field is so broad, the number of applications are so broad, that the idea that you have is very likely or to be unique in the province. That's not the case in Silicon Valley. If you went there, you'd be competing against 5 other companies that were doing precisely the same thing as you, and probably one of them would be at a more advanced stage. Here, absolutely not. And so it gives you the space to have a supportive community without that competitiveness. So yeah, I mean, absolutely. If I were coming out of university right now and could see it, because it's not always very visible, but if I could see it, I would be utterly convinced that it was worth investing to stay here for a while. When I graduated from university, the government was working so hard to keep people here that there was a tax credit for you to stay. And you know that if you worked here in the province for a few years, and I think it was kind of the hope that, you know, maybe you'd get married and have a kid and then you wouldn't be able to leave. And you know, or found a company and get established and see the benefits of being here. That's no longer needed, really. We can keep people here because there are opportunities, and there are opportunities to grow and be a successful company. We've got lots of them here. And I firmly believe that if it isn't already created within the next 5 to 10 years, the first prairie unicorn out of Saskatoon, the first $1 billion company, will be here and being created.
Cool. Last question. You had a tweet that went viral recently for a very good reason too. Can you tell me a little bit of the story, and then it's not backlash, but what do you call what happens when you do something inadvertently, then get a whole bunch of attention on it? That's good attention.
Unintended consequences.
Positive unintended consequences. So what happened?
Punishment. So I had an employee who came to me and asked to move to 80% time and 80% pay, and I told her no, that I didn't want her to do that. And that's how I framed my first tweet, was that I denied her permission to do that. Then I explained that women have been leaving the workforce during COVID in astounding numbers. And part of that is because they are overrepresented in the precarious economy, service economy, for instance, where they're the first people to be laid off, or when there's an economic downturn, those are the first people to suffer. But a large part of it is that there are increased family responsibilities, and still, for a couple of complicated reasons, but the first being that we don't pay women as well as we pay men in general, that when families have rational conversations about who's going to spend time helping kids with remote learning or taking over childcare duties because the daycares are closed, it falls to the women. And so women are sacrificing their careers. And this is setting back 20, 30, 40 years of gains in equal employment between women and men. And sadly, it's doing it in fields that have already very much struggled, like tech. So, we'll eventually learn the consequences of these last 10 months and the next 6 or 7 or 8. But unquestionably, we're losing women. And the consequences of that are going to lead to decreased visibility of women in leadership positions as clear mentors. It's going to mean that on their resumes, they're going to have these so-called unexplained gaps or reduced productivity for tenure, for promotion purposes. And we need to push back against that. And so I explained it in my own part. I'd invoked a Siemens software policy, which said that we don't care about the time that you spend in the office. We care about the outcomes. And I had a high performing team, and frankly, she was a high performing individual on that team. And I knew that her 80% effort was going to produce what many other people would call, 120% outcome. And so I had no concerns about working with her to find alternative ways. And she said, "Oh, I'll be really upset because, I'll feel guilty for not working in those times and still getting paid for it." And I was, well, okay, let's figure that out. And so we figured out a variety of strategies to help her do that and feel comfortable with taking less time. And nobody on my team is going to resent that. They've all had periods of lesser productivity in my team. They just turn around and they pick up for each other, and they manage it. If you have a family member who gets ill and want to care for them, you do it. If you have to step out for a doctor's appointment, somebody else has to cover, you do it. If you're just feeling down and you need a half day to be able to get your head in the game, we cover for you. And so those are the right things to do. And I happen to work for a company that supports that explicitly in their workplace policies. Turns out that's pretty rare. And so the tweet went viral. Last time I looked, it had something like 1.3 million impressions and 300,000 interactions, thousands and thousands of retweets and likes and whatnot. And that was just kind of on one platform. I've seen it all over Facebook. It got onto Board Panda. It went into LinkedIn and got thousands of places. And so I have no idea how much of an impact it's had, but it's been all over the place. And I woke up to bed. My company's headquarters are based in Germany, right? So I got up in the morning to a series of letters from people at very, very high up in my corporate chain that I was very concerned about opening. But when I opened them, they were all very, very positive. And so Siemens has helped a great deal. They've helped with media. They've helped with managing the social media aspect of it. And they've said that they're really pleased that this brought it to the fore, because this is the thing that they are trying to promote within the organization. And you can appreciate that a 350,000 employee business is a very hard ship to move.
Big time.
People who have worked one way all their lives are not likely to change because they receive an email from the CEO saying, that a general email to the CEO from the CEO saying, oh, you need to do this differently. And so their chance to see it exemplified and to promote that has been really valued. And so I feel valued, and I hope my employee feels valued. She's a bit overwhelmed by this and said, I don't want to talk to anyone about it. So she hasn't been on the media, which is fine. But it's been quite a ride.
That's so cool. I used to give a presentation called Outcare the Competition, saying like the best marketing is just caring more about what you do and who you do it for. And this is like internally, you've cared a little more than you needed to in that moment. And especially because you wrote it in a way that wasn't, you were basically just communicating a moment in time, which became a leadership lesson. That hopefully goes down in history, because to me, it's these moments that I want to bring up. Maybe it's because I have a daughter now, but I agree. I work in technology, and it's a joke sometimes, the male to female ratio. So I also like to see people in power actually caring about this, because somebody as involved in Sask Tech as you, that means like there's actually a future here. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to have been able to reinforce this and to elevate the conversation and to make it more important, both within our province, but also globally. For
sure. If people want to connect with you or find you online, where do they find you?
Well, Twitter's easy. I'm at Aaron Genest. You can also find me on LinkedIn. So as you're getting out there and into the job field, I'm very accessible to that. If you message me through LinkedIn and try and connect, I'm pretty good about accepting that, and I'm happy to try and provide some advice. I've also, if you're looking for things, if you want to know more about what my job looks like, I have written an article on LinkedIn about it. I've also got a few tweet threads related to the history of Solido, and there's even some answers on Quora there about graduate studies and what it's like to go to conferences and things like that. So I'm happy to try and help in any way.
Cool. A couple assignments there for students. I'm sure that teachers can get creative. Thanks you so much for your time. If there's anything else you want to add, this has been amazing. I feel like I'm almost like vibrating with excitement right now. I have to go look up some of your tweets.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a real pleasure.
Awesome. Okay, well, enjoy your day. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.